Hey everyone, it's Troy. The following podcast is about serious subjects pertaining to mental health, including suicide. For these reasons, listener discretion is advised.
There's a stat somewhere about most people actually don't want to die. With suicide, they don't actually want to die. They just want a solution to whatever they're going through. And I guess that was kind of with me, with my personal experience of I don't think I actually really wanted to die. I just really wanted to feel a sense of hope.
Welcome to Seacoast Stories, a podcast about the people, businesses, and newsmakers that make the Seacoast an American hidden gem. I'm Trey Farkas, and on today's episode, an intimate look at Carley Crain's mental health battles and how she's using her struggles to help others navigate theirs. Today's story starts in the fall of 2017. I'm in Bristol, Connecticut, working as a production assistant at ESPN Radio, just a few months removed from graduating college in 3 years. My job? Be a gopher, cut tape, press some buttons, and get really good at staying alert during overnight shifts. With my family 3 hours away, my friends off enjoying the senior year I didn't get to have, coupled with feeling like a meaningless cog in the corporate wheel, it wasn't long before depression found me. I felt so lost, so confused. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I dreamt of leaving, of giving it all up, of somehow making a living from writing blog posts while traveling the world. 2 years of working 60 hours a week, having no weekends off, and of spending every non-working hour alone took quite the toll on me. I lost a lot of weight and complained to my parents on the phone constantly. Eventually, I pulled myself from the funk thanks to some deft career maneuvers, but I sometimes wonder what would have happened had I not gotten so lucky. Those 2 years after graduating were so hard, the hardest years of my life. And today's guest, Carley Crain, is experiencing exactly the feeling that I used to. Carley will fill you in on the details, but first, I want to give you the most recent mental health data in New Hampshire, and this comes from the National Alliance on Mental Illness. In 2021, 221,000 adults in New Hampshire reported having a mental health condition. 38% reported symptoms of anxiety or depression. 57,000 had a, quote, serious mental health condition. And of the 70,000 adults in the state who did not receive treatment in 2021, 42% did so because of cost barriers, which is important to note for today's conversation. And lastly, 279 lives were lost to suicide that year, and 53,000 adults reported having suicidal thoughts. In Maine, all of this data is strikingly similar. Because of these trends, which are worsening across the Western world, more tools are emerging to help all of us navigate our mental health. One of those tools is peer support, a non-clinical method for helping people through their struggles. Think Alcoholics Anonymous, but for mental health. A group gets together, individuals share their experiences, and in doing so, they feel less alone and are then given tools to navigate mental health battles outside of the group. That's where Carley comes in. She's the Community Outreach Director for Connections Peer Support. They have locations in the west end of Portsmouth, as well as Northwood, New Hampshire, which, admittedly, I have no idea where that is.
Near Deerfield, Candia, middle of nowhere.
This is all gibberish to me. I have no idea what you're talking about, but clearly I have so much more of New Hampshire to explore. That's where I want to start today's episode, Carley, because you are a proud Manchesterite, Mancunian. I don't know. Is that how they say it?
Manch Vegas?
Manch Vegas. Yes, I've heard that one as well. We need to talk about Manch Vegas because anytime Manchester has come up in conversation out and about with other people, and I'm talking to other people about where should I go in New Hampshire, and I'll say Manchester, and the look on people's faces when I say that I want to go to Manchester, they are horrified.
Yeah.
never go to Manchester. You, on the other hand, you love Manchester. You are here to hype up Manchester. So please tell me why everyone else is crazy and why I should go spend some time in Manchester, Carley.
So I grew up in Hooksett, which is like right next to Manchester. And like Hooksett didn't have its own high school, but it had like middle school, elementary school. So like we had the choice of going to like any high school we wanted to, like in the greater Manchester area. So my sister and I were like, okay, we're going to go to Manchester Central, which is like downtown, like urban Manchester. Like when I told people I was going there, they're like, you are crazy. Why are you going there from like a small town Hooksett? But like, it really opened my eyes to the bigger world of like diversity. Like I met a lot of different types of people at Central. Like there's a lot of different populations, demographics, had some amazing teachers, classes. That's kind of, I guess, where I started my love for Manchester because I went to high school there. I spent so much time in Manchester. And then after I graduated college, I moved back to Manchester and I just started to hang out a lot more like in the downtown, like the bar scene. Like it's starting to get a younger crowd in Manchester, which is nice to see. But I actually don't live in Manchester anymore. I just moved to the seacoast. So,
well, welcome. We're happy to have you. What are the specific places, the spots in Manchester that when I ever go to this place that I have to hit?
Well, the Puritan is a great restaurant. It's owned by, I think, Chris Pappas and his family.
Okay.
Adam Sandler is also from Manchester.
He is?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
He actually went to my high school.
Really?
And I think that his family owns Goldenrod, which is another restaurant. They're like two local like ice cream spots. They have really good chicken tenders.
Okay.
Like really, really good chicken tenders. It's really random, but they have very good chicken.
Okay.
The Goat is a really nice spot in Manchester. Like I know that there's goats here, but the one in Manchester is huge. They have an outdoor bar. They have a great dancing area. Bonfire is a great country bar in downtown. The Snoo Arena has a bunch of like concerts and graduations and stuff like that.
And is it as dangerous as everyone makes it out to be?
No. No, I feel safe there.
Okay.
As a young woman, I feel safe. I mean,
you would walk around solo at night?
Probably not. I mean, I probably wouldn't really do that anywhere.
Okay, fair.
But I think it gets a bad rap just because like all urban environments tend to get a bad rap sometimes.
Right. Certain parts of the city, yeah.
But I think that Manchester's really growing and I think that there's a lot of history to it too. Like the mill buildings. I mean, that's like was a huge part of the Industrial Revolution and everything. So,
and looking back at your time living there and attending that school, which, as you said, was so diverse, do you think that really played a large part in who you are today in terms of what you're doing for work now and how open-minded you are to all different sorts of people?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. If I stayed in Hooksett, like if Hooksett had a high school, I don't think I'd be interested in social issues because Hooksett is a very white, privileged small town. And so I didn't really understand other populations and different things until I went to Central Manchester. And then I went to Springfield College, which is also in a very diverse city in Massachusetts. So I don't think I would be interested in this work if I wasn't in those environments.
Mm. Well, let's talk about this work. I have a psychologist friend, Carley, who lives in London. And she told me once that you don't get into this field without having gone through some mental problems yourself. And so I imagine with your work at Connections Peer Support Center, that is the case for you as well. So if you don't mind me asking, what struggles have you had that really connect to the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, well, I honestly never thought I would be working at a mental health center, if I'm being honest. I got to college and I was a journalism major and I went to Springfield, which is a very sports focused school. So a lot of my classes, a lot of the work I was doing was about athletics. And it wasn't until my junior year that I added sociology as a second major. And once I started that as a second major, I had internships at mental health clinics and other nonprofits. And I was like, oh, wow, this work is really, really cool. I'm making a difference. And that kind of just sparked this thing in me of journalism is fun and I love writing about sports, but it's not as meaningful to me personally as working at a nonprofit, working with clients or people who need direct support. So then after I graduated, I was looking I was looking for jobs, and I worked at a political organization for a little bit. And I was like, fun, but not really what I want to do like all the time. And then I stumbled on Connections, and I was like, wow, this is a great place. And I love working here. But mental health has always been like very important to me and my family. A lot of people in my family like have anxiety, they have depression. My twin sister, like she has struggled with mental health, and like seeing her go through that, was hard, but it helped me pursue the help that I needed. I got diagnosed with anxiety from like a very young age. Like I've always kind of known I've had anxiety, but it wasn't until after I graduated college that I got diagnosed with depression.
I'm sorry to cut you off. You never hear one without the other. Everyone always groups anxiety and depression together. Mm-hmm. Can you just define the two, and what are the differences?
Yeah. I'll just speak on my experience, but like anxiety for me is very like a bodily experience. It's hard for me to breathe when I'm anxious. Like my chest tightens up. I start to pace. Like I can't focus. Panic attacks, whatever. But with depression, at least for me, it's like I can't get out of bed. Like I can't do normal activities. The day to day, like I have no motivation to get up and go to walk or go to spin or anything. It's like that crushing like loneliness feeling of like you can't get up and do anything. At least that's, again, my personal experience with depression. And I never thought that I honestly would be diagnosed with it. Like I feel like I'm a pretty happy, like social person. And so when I got diagnosed with depression, it was a little hard for me to accept. Because I was like, oh, that's not me. Even I had that stigma of like, well, that's not me. Like I don't have depression. Like I'm happy. But after I graduated, it was like a really hard time of like, what am I doing? Who am I? Like I am lost. Like I feel drowning in student loan debt and trying to get a job. So it was hard, I guess, to kind of come to terms with that of like, oh, I have depression.
And I'm sure COVID times did nothing to help you with that.
Yeah.
Going back to your initial anxiety all those years ago, what were the tools that were given to you to help overcome that or deal with that?
Honestly, looking back, I wish I kind of seeked out more resources. I think for a while I was really hesitant about going to therapy or getting on medication. I was like, oh, I'm not going to do that. Like, honestly, like in high school, college, I should have been on medication. But I wasn't. I was scared. And it wasn't until...
Of what?
I guess just like depending on medication for mental health issues. I was like, oh, like I don't want to depend on that. I want to figure it out myself. Like that ego of like, I can do it myself, which I think a lot of people have with mental health is like, oh, I can figure it out myself. And I think that's very normal, but it's also like, you can't always do everything by yourself. And I actually just recently got on antidepressants, and it's been very helpful for me. I've already noticed a really big difference. And even recently, like I was hospitalized for my depression, and I was in the hospital for 8 days. And it's hard to talk about it sometimes because I'm like, oh, like how did I get there? How did I end up there? But it was really needed. I honestly like was able to get on medication. I was able to talk to counselors about what was going on, kind of just take a step back from like my life. And it was very helpful. But like, it's very normal. And I think that's one thing that at Connections, we really try and help people with is like, you're not alone in your mental health. And like, I felt so alone for so long. And so I don't want people to feel like alone in their mental health struggles.
As a self-described happy person, what were the telltale signs that you were depressed, or what made you finally come to grips with this fact? Maybe I am depressed. Maybe I should ask for help, or maybe I should go seek a diagnosis or try to get medication for this.
Yeah, I think it was just kind of starting to consume all of my thoughts. Anxiety for me also is like a lot of overthinking, like just really in my head. And again, post-grad like has been a very difficult time for me. And I know it's a time that's very difficult for a lot of people. And I just felt so alone and like, what am I doing? I felt alone that like I have so much in student loan debt. I felt alone that, I'm not working a corporate job and making like 6 figures. Like I just felt like the comparison trap was like making me feel very depressed. And a lot of my friends from college like don't live in this area because like I went to out-of-state school. So like the loneliness feeling was really heavy of like, oh, like, yeah, I have friends in New Hampshire, but my best friends from college, it's like, you got to plan weeks out in advance to see them because they live far away.
When a drastic step is taken, like getting hospitalized, it's usually on the back end of some type of rock bottom moment, some, oh crap, I have a problem, I need help. Did you have any experience that caused you to go get help immediately?
Yeah, my older sister actually was really there for me. She was worried about me, and she called the mobile crisis team, like 988, and they came, and I was able to talk to them, and they're like, we can't force you because you're an adult, but we highly recommend going to this center. We think that they could really help you. And I think I just kind of got to a point where I was like, I feel so down. I felt like hopeless. I really did. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what's going on. I was going through at that time, like a lot of transitions in my life. Like I was trying to move to the seacoast, but like that was putting a lot of stress on me because, moving to the seacoast is very expensive. And I was like, I can't do it. But like, I've always wanted to live in this area. So like that was causing me a lot of stress and anxiety. I was like going through a breakup at the time. So that kind of just like added to it. That was hard. And again, just like managing like this new diagnosis of depression post-grad. It was just really hard to go from like a very structured environment to like, now it's like all up on you. I'm like, yeah, I have a job, like I'm in grad school, but it's like very different. And like, I'm a very extroverted person. So it's hard for me to like not be around like all my friends in college and stuff. So I feel like that contributed. There's just a lot of contributing factors that kind of just kept on building and building. And then eventually I was like, I just need to take this for myself, figure it out, and get help.
And I don't know if you're able to talk about it or if it's confidential, but are you able to say what happened in those 8 days, what your day-to-day was like?
Yeah. So I was at the Cypress Center in Manchester, which is like part of a community mental health center. The Seacoast has one. It's called Seacoast Mental Health. They didn't really let me be on my phone a lot. It was like 15 minutes a day, which actually was really helpful. I've actually like been taking a social media break. I haven't been on like my personal social media for probably like over 3 weeks now, which has been huge. And like the comparison trap. Like I was like, you know what? I'm just cold turkey. No Instagram, no Snapchat, no TikTok. And it's been very helpful. But they had like groups where we would talk about different mental health topics. There was like art activities, puzzles, like games. They had like nurses and counselors on staff all the time. So like I had like meetings with the counselors and the doctors to talk about my medication and like my treatment plan. I slept a lot, honestly. Like I think I really needed to rest. Obviously it's scary like going into an environment like that and you're like, what am I doing? But it was very nice to just like take a step back from life for 8 days.
And when you were there, did you lean fully into it? Because I imagine a lot of people maybe get dragged there kicking and screaming. It's not their choice. Someone else makes this choice on their behalf. And then when they're there, they just push back. Oh, I don't need that. I don't have this issue. So I'm just wondering what your mindset was like while you were there.
I think at the beginning, I was like, honestly, I just like slept and cried. Like I was like, don't talk to me. I was like, and people were trying to call me like, and like my mom and my friends and stuff. But for a while, I was really hesitant about like taking calls because I was embarrassed, honestly. I was like, I never thought that I would like be hospitalized for my mental health. And there is stigma associated with that. But yeah, I think I was a little embarrassed for a while. So I didn't take any calls or anything. But towards the end, I started to be more involved in the groups. And there actually were some people there that were my age, which was nice. So I was able to like talk to them and started to see some hope towards the end, which helped.
The conversation around social media, technology in general, and mental health is well documented. So I'm just wondering, from your experience, was that, you mentioned comparison, was just the exposure to how other people live and scrolling on social media endlessly, being fed whatever your algorithm feeds you, was that really weighing on your mental health?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. And I think that a lot of people my age go through that after graduation because you see people having these crazy jobs, like crazy good jobs, or they're going on all these vacations, or they're traveling, or, they're with their partners or whatever. And it's very easy to be like, oh, I wish that was me. I wish that was my life. And I think that one thing that social media is a highlight reel. People post what they want to, not the day-to-day like bad moments. And so I think I have to remind myself of that. But yeah, I feel like the doom scrolling is real. Like,
yeah.
So it's been great going cold turkey and just like being a lot more present.
How have you been able to quit cold turkey? Because there's so many people, whether it's smoking, drinking, doom scrolling, whatever the bad habit is, they all know it's bad for them. They want to stop, but the addictive nature of it, you can't stop. So how have you been able to just stop?
I feel like I've been like really hard on myself about it. I'm like, no, do not go on Instagram. Do not go on this. But like, it's hard because I still have to go on Instagram for connections because I run all of our accounts. So like, I've been on like nonprofit Instagram, which is not toxic. We love.
I would hope not.
Yeah, we love nonprofit Instagram. But I've been like just reading more like at night. Like if I'm like, oh, I want to go on my phone, then I just read.
It's important to note that you were working in mental health and still are at Connections while you were undergoing your own issues. And at Connections, all of the people on staff have had their own issues.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, why is it so important for the people on staff? Why is it so important for them to have that window of experience in terms of helping the people who come into the center?
I think actually almost everyone on staff has now been hospitalized for mental. Now I just added to that. But I think us being very open about our experiences helps people feel like they can open up about theirs. Because, a lot of times, like with doctors or with just other people in like the field, you don't really know much about them.
Right.
Which is like, the standard practice, like that's fine. But like sometimes people really want to feel like they're not alone in their mental health. And so that's what's so unique about peer support is that we're all very open of like, hey, we've been through this too. And we're going to use our experiences to help you go through what you're currently dealing with. So, we can't prescribe medication. We are not master's level clinicians. So that is definitely needed for a lot of people.
How difficult is it for you as someone who has had so many issues pertaining to mental health? How difficult is it for you to shoulder that burden? Because you are still dealing with your own issues and now you have to help people navigate their own issues, often very emotionally taxing issues.
I think that boundaries are definitely really important. But I think what's so great about peer support is that there's no like upper hierarchy, like hand of like, oh, I'm a staff member, like I'm better than you. There's not that kind of attitude, which is like personally one thing that I love about peer support. So I feel like I'm getting just as much as they're getting out of it as well. So I feel like me sharing about my experiences, they share about theirs, and then it kind of all helps us. Like I've been starting to feel like a lot more comfortable talking about me going to the hospital because like there's so many people at Connections who've had that similar experience. And I'm like, oh, I'm not crazy. Like this is normal. And so I think that has helped. It's also helped me, I guess, in my personal life, like feel more comfortable even going to get mental health services of like, oh, like there's other people doing it. Like I can do it too.
You mentioned there's a stigma around the non-clinical aspect of it. What would be your pushback to that?
Well, I think that just because it's non-clinical doesn't mean that we're not professional, educated, certified individuals.
Okay. So you do have certifications.
Yeah. So to be a peer support specialist in New Hampshire, you have to go through a certification with the state. It's a 10-week class. And then after you go through the class, you pass the test through the class, then you become a certified peer support specialist. So I got my certification a few months ago, and everyone at our center and organization is either has it or they're currently going through the training. So
at Connections, you mentioned some of the reasons that might lead someone to walk through the doors. Are you able to say what are the biggest drivers of people showing up, the biggest issues that people are dealing with regards to their mental health?
I would say definitely anxiety and depression. I think those are two big ones, but also just a sense of isolation and loneliness, I think is really big.
Yeah.
We have some older individuals who come to our center, like 65 and older. And, for those folks who have disabilities or they have no access to transportation, or if they live in a more rural part of the seacoast, then it's really hard for them to feel connected to their community. And so I think that we see that a lot at our center.
And what are the biggest antidotes to loneliness?
I'm trying to figure that out one myself.
It's hard. So you struggle with loneliness too?
Oh, yeah. Like I was saying earlier, like it's hard when like you go to college at state and like all your friends live far away. I think FaceTime is definitely a great option. Just connection with people in general, whatever that looks like for you. I guess one way I personally do it is like going to Studio One, going to spin.
Shout out. Yeah. We love Studio One on this podcast.
Love Studio One so much. Like that's a way of me like getting like my physical exercise in, but also like a social activity of like, oh, look, there's like 45 people in the class all like screaming and dancing.
Yeah, it's
like,
a vibe.
It's awesome. So like that's a social thing for me. Or at our center, like we really try to push people to be involved in the groups, because if they're involved in our groups, then they're going to be with people who are like-minded and going through similar things. And they often feel better when they participate in the groups.
Yeah. As I'm sure you've been finding, Carley, it is very difficult to make friends beyond college.
Yes.
Because at every walk of life in your life up until that point, your life is pretty scripted. You know what the next rung is. Okay, I'm in middle school, then I'm going to high school, then I'm going to college. And these are my friends from sports. These are my friends from the choir that I'm in or whatever school group I'm in. And then in college, you're a freshman, your dorm, everyone's in the same boat.
Yeah.
Dating is so much easier as well because like you just have access to all of these people.
Yeah.
But then afterwards, if you think of it like a tree, you have all of these different branches. Your life can go off in any one of these different directions, and you never know which one is the correct one to choose. And then you're constantly comparing yourself to the path that other people are taking. It's very, very difficult. And especially in this age of technology, which connects us even more than we ever have been before, but also disconnects us even more in a way, which really makes no sense, but it's very difficult.
Yeah, I feel like it's been disconnecting people, honestly, more. Like it's contributing to the loneliness epidemic.
And dividing people more too, for sure.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people like at our center, like they might not have social media. So it's like them coming to our center or them like being involved in in-person activities. Like that's the way that they get their social engagement.
You mentioned the financial aspect. This is a totally free service, which obviously people who want to go to therapy or have access to medication, there's costs associated, there's insurance associated. As with most companies, I don't believe insurance covers therapy, but it is starting to go, as far as I understand, starting to go that direction where more employers are open to having that be a benefit, which is awesome. But this is totally free. Can I just ask, how is this free?
Yeah, so we get 95% of our funding through the state of New Hampshire because of like the 10-year mental health plan that Governor Sununu kind of initiated.
Oh, wow.
And then we have 5% of our funding from fundraising, donors, grants, etc. But that's like how a lot of nonprofits get their funding, is through grants, through donors, for us specifically the state. So we're able to provide our services for free because of those. I do think that New Hampshire as a state like is really doing a great job with mental health. We're not the only peer support agency in the state. I believe there's 12, and there's one in at least every region of the state. So there's one in Manchester, there's one in Keene, there's one in the North Country, which is really important because like different areas of the state, struggle with different levels of accessibility, especially, like up north. People might have a hard time accessing mental health services. So it's really nice to see that like there are peer support agencies up north. And yeah.
If you're dealing with a specific issue, call it anxiety or depression, is there a specific group for that? Or is it just kind of people sitting in a circle, each dealing with their own issues, sharing? What's it like?
So we do have groups Monday through Friday that are about specific topics. So we do have an anxiety group. We have a depression group. I facilitate an LGBTQ group on Tuesdays. So every day, Monday through Friday, we have unique groups. So that's on our website, our schedule. It's also in our newsletter and on social media. So people can look into those avenues if they're interested in our groups. Art is also a big part of our center. People find art to be very therapeutic. So one of our peer support specialists, he actually went to art school. So he's very, very good at art. So he does a lot of like art-centric activities for our members.
Coming up, how to help your loved ones through suicidal thoughts, and why we all need to be more open about our feelings. Stay with us. This is Seacoast Stories. Hey everyone, it's Troy. Thank you for listening to this conversation with Carley Crain. Mental health is important, and it's crucial that everyone on the Seacoast knows that something like Connections exists. To help me spread the word about this wonderful program, I need you to share this episode with someone that would benefit from it. If more people know that free resources like Connections exist, the more mentally healthy we can make the Seacoast. So please share it in a text message, talk about it over coffee, or post the episode on social media. This is not an exaggeration. It just might save someone's life. Thank you so much for doing that and for being here today. I really appreciate it. Now back to today's story. Part of the impetus for having this conversation at this specific time, it is September. It is Suicide Prevention Month. And I'm really curious to talk about this with you. Now, according to let me find it in my notes, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which sets Suicide Prevention Month, their goal is to raise awareness and, quote, shift perception. That caught my attention. Are you able to tell me, Carley, what the perception around suicide is now and what professionals like yourself are trying to shift it toward?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of different viewpoints and opinions, I guess, people have about suicide. There's still some stigma about suicide of like, it's selfish. It's a selfish act of like, how could someone do that? They're not thinking of anyone else. They're just thinking of themselves. And I mean, it's horrible to even say that because obviously I don't believe that. But like, there are people who like still kind of hold that assumption.
Why don't you believe that?
I mean, I've personally struggled with suicidal thoughts, and it's more of if people are really struggling with suicide or thinking about it, at least from my perspective, they are just so down and they're just trying to find a solution. There's a stat somewhere about like most people actually don't want to die. Like with suicide, they don't actually want to die. They just want a solution to whatever they're going through. And I guess that was kind of with me, with my personal experience of like, I don't think I actually like really wanted to die. I just really wanted to feel a sense of hope. And so I think with suicide, a lot of times like people just feel so hopeless and they want that feeling of security of like, they can get through whatever is happening in their life. And so I think we try and really talk about that Connections of like, talk to us about what you're going through. What's going on? How can we support you? Because if we can get people to talk about what they're going through, they're less likely to feel like they have to do something like suicide. A lot of times people just want a safe, non-judgmental space where they can really talk about whatever is going on. And so that's what we really try to push at Connections of like, let's really make people feel comfortable for them to share.
And how do you provide that space?
Like I've mentioned, like I think that a lot of times with suicide, people just feel so hopeless. That hopelessness is definitely a driving factor in suicide. And so I think, how can we make people feel less hopeless? How can we support them so they can feel some type of hope? And I think that's what we try to do. A lot of like factors of suicide are like social issues of, Like if someone doesn't have access to safe housing and they're unhoused, like that could be a huge factor of suicide. Someone who is really struggling financially, or if they have a disability, or if they're LGBTQ. I mean, those are all factors that could lead to someone attempting or suicide. So I think, how can we prevent, like how can we support people through those different factors? And so I think that's really important. Like you see, like there's stats all the time that like LGBTQ individuals are at a much higher risk of suicide compared to their straight counterparts. And a big part of that is because of the discrimination and the ongoing homophobia that they experience every day. And like we can, as a society, like we can prevent that if we treat people with kindness and respect. We try to ask, like guiding questions. We try to have the person feel like they have some type of autonomy over their mental health recovery, because sometimes in the mental health system, some people don't have a say in their recovery. People have others deciding, what medication they're going on, what appointments they're going to. Like they don't have an actual say in their own care, which doesn't really make a lot of sense when we're talking about someone's mental health. But it does happen a lot of like they don't actually have a say in their care. So we really try to have them kind of guide the conversation of like, what do you want from this? How do you want us to support you? Kind of put that on them of like, how can we best navigate this with you? Because everyone looks different. Some people want to do art to kind of get their feelings out, or they want to talk to maybe a woman instead of a man. Like it just is really dependent. So we try to meet those specific needs of an individual.
You mentioned that you have had your own suicidal thoughts. I imagine that there's different tiers of thoughts, ranging from very serious and urgent to more so just passing thoughts. So I'm just wondering, if you don't mind me asking, and please do not feel like you have to share, but I'm just wondering in which category your thoughts fell into.
I mean, I had a plan. Like I kind of had an idea of like what I wanted to do. But I think reflecting on it now, I really just wanted an out of what I was going through at the time. I truly don't think I wanted to die, but I just wanted an out, and that just felt like the only way. But I'm really grateful for the support system I have, going to the Cypress Center. I don't know if anyone in Manchester is listening to this from the Cypress Center, but I love them. They're great. So I think that having a support system is like really important for mental health recovery. And we try to provide that at Connections of, we can be someone's like support system in a way of like, they can come to our center and get the support that they need.
Outside of the peer support or therapy environments, if I'm just a person and I have a friend who is having suicidal thoughts, is going through these issues that are running so deeply, and someone confides in me, as the friend, what is my duty? What is the best way for me to support them in that moment?
Yeah. Well, I definitely think it looks different for every individual, but the fact that your friend would feel comfortable telling you is something to acknowledge. It's a big step of like, they took the initiative to go and talk to you and be vulnerable about that. So I think that should be acknowledged. But I think, again, it depends on the situation. If you feel like they would be receptive to hearing about maybe resources, I would definitely recommend like 988 is the crisis line that anyone can call. And that could be really helpful. They also have like a text line too. So if someone doesn't want to call them, you can text. Veterans, for example, like if you have a friend who's a veteran or something, like there's a veterans crisis line as part of 988. And so that could be really helpful. Like, hey, you don't have to do this, but there's this resource out there that might be helpful. But like I've mentioned, I think that trying to get the person to talk about it can be really helpful and therapeutic for them. And just having them kind of guide the conversation, like not forcing them to talk, but be like, hey, I'm here for you. Like, how can I support you? what can I do to make you feel better? Questions like that.
You mentioned 988. That's the national number to call. Anyone can call that. But at Connection specifically, you have a warm line.
Yes. I
will put the number in the show notes of this episode, but why would someone call the warm line? What would prompt someone to reach out there?
Yeah. So a warm line is kind of a intentional space where someone can seek mental health support. We don't do crisis intervention unless if it was like an extreme situation. But our warm line is kind of a space where someone can call before they might get into a crisis. Or if they feel like symptoms are starting or they're really having a hard time and they want to avoid a crisis, they can call us and talk about whatever's going on, whatever they're going through. But like 988 is more of like, this person's in a crisis. Like they need immediate help. And our members have utilized 988. It's a great, I've utilized it. It's a great service. And I'm glad that like it's a 3-digit number now because it makes it so easy.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, Carley, but I would love to ask you. So a lot of cities, especially in the west coast of the country, are really dealing with massive homelessness issues right now. Here on the seacoast and specifically in downtown Portsmouth, it's nowhere near as rampant, but there are a few around and some are probably battling their own mental health issues. There's a few ways to handle those interactions based on what I've seen. You can walk right by them and act like these people don't exist. You can give them something that they're asking for. You can say no thanks when they ask. There's a million different ways that I've seen. But I'm just curious from your perspective, Carley, what do you think is the best way to handle these kinds of interactions?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stigma associated with homelessness. And it honestly breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Because, we do have some people who are unhoused who have come to Connections. And I think that a lot of times people forget that they're humans. They're real people going through real challenges. And I think there's also a big stigma of like, it's their fault. Like they had to do something to get them unhoused. Like it's their fault. And a lot of times that's not the case. A lot of times there might be abuse or trauma that kind of had homelessness like be an end result, or domestic violence. Domestic violence is a huge factor of homelessness. Just relationship abuse, violence in general. LGBTQ folks are more likely to be unhoused because of the discrimination that they might face. So I think those are all different kind of things to consider. Or, people with mental health challenges, they could be at more risk of homelessness. So I think, treating people with respect at the end of the day, they are just the same as you and I. And honestly, people who are unhoused are some of the strongest people I know. I mean, imagine like living on the streets every day, trying to get through, trying to get by. I mean, I think we all need to have a little bit more compassion and empathy for people going through that. So I would say, treat them like just normal people because they are just normal people. Yeah. They're just going through a tough time. And, the housing crisis in New Hampshire is very bad right now.
Is it?
Rent is insane.
Yeah.
So a lot of people also like are stuck in the rental market and they can't buy homes or anything. So
right. Another big group that you've mentioned several times is the LGBTQ community, and this is something that you personally are spearheading a lot at Connections, is more opportunities for people who fall in this category to come in and share their experiences. So just off the top, why is this area so important to you?
Well, personally, I'm bi, and I've been open about it for a few years. I came out in college, and I guess it's really important to me because I understand, again, like the loneliness feeling of feeling like you're the only one that's LGBTQ in your life, in your group. And personally, it wasn't really until I got to college where I met a lot of people who are LGBTQ. But before that, like no one in my family is. Like I didn't know a lot of people in grade school that were LGBTQ. So I didn't really I wasn't exposed to it.
And did you always know that you were bisexual?
No.
When did you realize that?
I think like college, I was exposed to more things. I had more experiences and I felt more comfortable being like, oh, this is like who I am. And like my senior year, I lived with 2 girls that were dating, and like that made me feel a lot more comfortable of like, oh, like like they're so comfortable, with who they are, and they're very open about their relationship. So then they really helped me feel comfortable with my identity. Just like being in college, I think a lot of people are more exposed to the LGBTQ community because, college is such a big space with so many people. And that's kind of where I started to feel more comfortable. I also started to just be more involved in the community. Like I love like Renee Rapp and Fletcher and like, all those queer artists, like huge fan. And then like when I graduated, I worked at a political organization and most of my coworkers were LGBTQ. And I was like, wow, this is awesome. And so like once I started to feel more involved in the community, I started to feel more comfortable with myself. And I think that's why at Connections, I was like, we really need to have a consistent group for the LGBTQ community so they don't feel alone and that they can talk about, whatever is going on, like coming out, or if they are in a new queer relationship, or if they're trying to put themselves out there, whatever. Like there's so many things that community goes through. And I just want people to feel like they're not alone and that there's other people like them.
The Connections website, you wrote a little blog post in June during Pride Month. And if you don't mind, I want to read an excerpt here from it, which I really enjoyed. This was very powerful writing.
Oh, thank you.
I would just love to get your reaction to this or perhaps further explanation on what you wrote. These people, being LGBTQIA+, are your neighbors, your friends, your family. Even if you do not know them, they are human beings. You should not have to know them in order to want them to have happiness and safety in their lives. Carley, do you feel that a lot of people who are not in the LGBTQIA+ category just really struggle seeing their point of view, accepting their perspective?
Oh yeah. I think especially with people who are trans, a lot of people might not have anyone in their life who is trans, and so they're like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, I think that people are scared. I think that some people are scared of things that are very different to them. Like we like structural, we like routine
Yes.
in the United States,
Familiarity.
And so I think that when someone is very different and they're very happy about who they are, it's scary to someone who doesn't understand that. And so I think that that's why it's so important of like exposing people to the LGBTQ community of like, these are your like I said, like these are your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers, like everyone deserves respect. And that's something that at Connections, like we are really mindful of like, anyone who walks into our center, they deserve the mental health care that they need, no matter what they're going through, who they are, what their past is, doesn't matter. Like we're going to support them in the moment because they deserve that.
And when members from this community come into Connections, what are the biggest issues that they address in the group that you are in?
I think we've talked a lot about like coming out. That could be a really scary experience for a lot of people, especially if they feel like they have to come out multiple times in a way. Like I feel like I'm coming out constantly. I'm like, like I just came out to you. Like It's like every time you meet someone new, it's like you kind of have to be like, okay, do I come out to this person? Like, is it safe? Are they going to be accepting? Am I comfortable doing this? And so I think that's a part of being LGBTQ that a lot of people have to navigate. And like in a work setting, is it okay to share that I'm LGBTQ? Like those are questions that people are constantly having in their head. And so I think that we try to help people with that of like, how do I feel safe? How do I feel comfortable? How do I have my boundaries about it too? Because you don't have to come out to anyone if you don't want to.
Right.
It's really a personal choice. So I think navigating those types of conversations can have a lot of anxiety attached to them.
Yeah.
So helping people through that.
You also wrote, I am constantly thrown by how quickly people will dig their heels in and refuse to use simple words that allow another human being to feel respected. Perhaps here you are referring to the pronouns, and this is something that we should definitely address.
I didn't realize that I wrote that. I said that.
Yeah. Well,
I wrote that a while ago. Yeah.
This is 3 months ago. We all have short attention spans.
Yeah.
The pronouns, why are those important?
I think pronouns are important because it's someone's identity. It's who they are. And if that's constantly disrespected, it feels like a personal attack. And I mean, my pronouns are just she, her. So like, it's not something very personal to me, but like to a lot of people, like that's who they are. That's their identity. And if someone is constantly using the wrong pronouns, it feels like a jab at who they are as a person. And so I think that when you reaffirm someone's pronouns, it makes them feel safe and supported and loved. And, you know, that's a feeling that we want everyone to have in their life. And so it's just such a simple thing. Like, we had like a training from Seacoast Outright one time at our center, and they were talking about like when a woman gets married and changes her last name, people are so quick to refer to them as their new last name. So why can't we have that same attitude about people's pronouns? And that really put into perspective for me. I was like, oh yeah, when someone gets married, it's like not a big deal. Like people immediately start using their new last name. So when people are like, oh, pronouns are so hard, it's like, not really. Like you do it all the time. Like when someone gets married or when someone changes their name. So I think it's just all about like intentionality and like being respectful. Like if someone's having a hard time with pronouns, like let's just say like someone's pronouns are they, them. And my best advice is like, just use their name as much as possible. So like if their name is Paul, just be like, oh, hey, that's Paul. Paul said this. Paul did this. Like, that's like, I feel like the easiest way I can explain it of like, you know, if you're having a hard time, I guess, if someone uses different pronouns, just try and use their actual name as much as possible. That's kind of what I tell people if they're having a hard time.
I like that. You are a proud member of the Daddy Gang, which,
oh yes,
for those of you who don't know, Call Her Daddy is one of the biggest podcasts in the world. It's hosted by Alex Cooper, formerly a coworker of mine. No longer. She just signed a deal with Sirius. Bye, Alex. You're a big fan of this show. And I imagine one big reason why is she herself is very open about her own mental health struggles in the past, and a common theme on the show, which is primarily about women and conversations with women for female listeners, the biggest female listenership on any podcast in the world. So I'm curious, how important is it to have voices like hers, Alex's, people who have big platforms to talk about mental health in terms of advancing the international conversation around it?
I mean, I think it's huge. I think it helps normalize the conversation. It helps people feel like they're not alone, that someone like with so much fame and popularity, like if they're going through that, like it's normal for me to go through that. I think, you know, we've seen that with Simone Biles. And I think that she has been huge part of changing the conversation with specifically athletes' mental health.
Yeah.
But like people like her, actually Simone Biles was on Call Her Daddy.
Yep.
They are really impactful for mental health. If Simone Biles is going through it, like she's the best gymnast in the world, like it's okay if I'm going through it too. Like Simone Biles has a documentary on Netflix and she goes like pretty in depth about her mental health. And like, I highly recommend watching it because it really just makes you feel like I'm not alone. And like, even like someone with the most talent in the world and like all these gold medals, like they have everything.
Yeah.
Everything. But they're struggling too. And so I think it helps normalize the conversation. I think I would love to see like more and more men come out and talk about their mental health. I think that is so important. There's still a lot of stigma, unfortunately, with men's mental health. And I, again, would love to see more men in a position like Alex be open about their mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. And luckily there has been a sea change in terms of people openly talking about mental health. Still lots to go. But personally, I work in sports and I know Kevin Love, DeMar DeRozan, these are famous NBA players. And there's been several other people to have talked about it, but they were kind of the trailblazers for male athletes.
Yeah.
Very important for men to do because, as I said on a recent episode of this podcast, men don't really like to get vulnerable by and large. They don't like to talk about real feelings.
Yeah.
I hate having surface level conversation with men. I hate talking. I don't want to talk about golf. I don't want to talk about investment. I don't want to talk about crypto. I don't want to talk about sports. Like, I want to talk about real shit. So that's why I love really talking to women, because you guys are by and large way more down to talk about those things. But men, get open about your feelings. It's time.
Yeah. Talk about your feelings. It's okay to cry. It's funny, like, as a woman, like, dating men, and you're just like, please be open about your feelings. Yeah. Talk to me about your feelings. But they're like, I don't know how. And it's like, okay, well, like, let's work on that. And there's still like that huge stigma of like, if men talk about their feelings, like, they're weak. They're not as strong. They're not the providers or whatever. Right. And so, but like, I think it's personally like very strong to be vulnerable. Like, I had a therapist in college tell me that my sensitivity is my superpower. And I was like, wow. And that has stuck with me every single day since he said that to me in college. And I think it's really strong to be open about your feelings. It's not easy. And that's what we really try to do at Connections, of like, let's talk about what you're going through. It's okay to cry. If you need a hug, we'll give you a hug. It's normal. I mean, like, we're human beings. We're meant to be emotional. We're not meant to just be like, just stick figures. So
one of the strongest things you can do is admit weakness and that you need help. You don't have to do it alone. And that's a big part of what Connections is all about.
It makes you human.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Carley, we have one final question. I have enjoyed this conversation very much. Thank you so much for opening up, for being vulnerable, and for talking about things that many people would be otherwise very uncomfortable talking about, and for sharing all the work that you guys do at Connections. We have one final question that we ask to the guests every week, and I will ask that to you.
Okay.
Carley, what is the mission that you are on right now in your life?
That's such a great question. I love that you asked that to everyone.
I'm just so fascinated by what drives people, why they do what they do. And also, I think it's a question that all of us should just ponder every now and then to get the temperature. Okay, what am I doing right now? What are my values? What do I stand for? And what am I doing on a day-to-day basis reflecting of that?
Yeah. I think that something that's always been important to me is being open and vulnerable about my feelings and what I'm going through. And I want people to feel like they can do that as well. And I actually recently had someone tell me, I like cried. Like, it was so sweet. They were like, Carley, you've made me a better person. You've helped me open up about my feelings. And I've never opened up about my feelings to anyone except you. And I was like, that's what I do. Honestly, like, it made me so happy when they said that. I was like, wow. And so I think people just feeling safe and respected and heard, I think, is something that we all should do as humans. And you think it'd be just like a common sense, like, basic thing, but unfortunately it's not. So I think, that kind of what drives me, of like making people feel like they're not alone and that they're heard and respected.
That's Carley Crain from Connections Peer Support in Portsmouth and Northwood. If you'd like to take advantage of their free services, just drop in anytime between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and until 8 p.m. on Tuesday, Thursday. For a list of the groups they offer, just visit connectionspeersupport.org, the link to which is in today's show notes. You can reach their warm line number from 5 to 10 p.m. by calling 603-427-6966. And for more urgent matters, the suicide and crisis hotline number is 988. I hope you took away something meaningful from this episode. If you did, please let me know by leaving a review of Seacoast Stories on Apple Podcasts, or by sending @Seacoast Stories a message on Instagram, or by stopping me when you see me bopping around the Seacoast. That's it for today. I'll be back next Monday with another very important conversation, but until then, I hope you all have a great week, and I will talk to you very soon.